Palmer beat him, must have been killed about the time he was
Probably down in
graduating.
On a certain play, they gave the ball to Rizzo. And as he's going, he fumbled. People all got up and hollered, "Hey, Carl, who was that?" "I don't know."
This,
No partiality there.
I want you to know this is fabricated, but it sounds good.
Remember that? What a great story. You remember that?
No, I don't.
Well, that in mind, we'll give Marion a chance to defend himself.
All right.
We
Oh,
can
dear.
start, and then when the food comes, we can take a break to eat, and then come back. Larry Anderson has joined us today. I think you've all had a chance to meet Larry, and if you haven't, take advantage of the fact that he's with us. And Larry, nice to have you with us. Marion, you've been to every one of these.
Well,
And
so many of them.
we
you know.
appreciate very much you taking yourself from the side and put yourself at the head table and to share with us. So you know the format, and let's just enjoy.
I would like to open by saying that today is a milestone in my life. The fact that I was allowed to speak to you people and to share my experiences with you in sports is very noteworthy, but there has been something that's even a little more so, and that is, as I look at my clock, my watch, right now it's about 12 noon, and in Italy today, right now it would be around 6 o'clock. It was 50 years ago today, October 12, 1944, being in World War II, that I was able to make my first and last visit with my grandparents in Italy. This is a real milestone for me. I can remember vividly that we stopped in Palermo for a dry dock. I was in the Navy, and when our ship was going through some repairs, you know, and we were there for 4 days, and there was besides myself, there was a fellow by the name of Terranella who had relatives in Sicily also. But I took my 2 days first, my 48 hours. I got a Jeep, went all the way down across the island, the Sicily, to meet my grandparents. And I can remember vividly going up. He lived up on a hill. And so I went up with my Jeep, and I parked the Jeep at the top of the hill, and they saw me dressed in a naval officer's uniform. They never saw any of these creatures there during the war, you know. And they wondered, you know, who's this guy? And so I says, well, I'm looking for, you know, my grandfather's. My grandfather got wind that his grandson from America was here. He limped on a cane. He got about halfway up the hill with a cane. He finally threw the damn thing and ran up the hill to meet me. I remember that. That was very, very emotional and a very noteworthy incident. This all happened 50 years ago today.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Fabulous.
Time flies, don't it?
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Of course, you were a different picture then than you are now.
You mean picture? What do you mean? What picture? You mean my photo? I tried to explain to Parky that the Post-Journal photography department has ways of erasing, you know, those little skins in your skin, you know, so you look smoother in the photograph. He doesn't believe that's a photo of me.
You know, you tell Lex a while that they cannot put hair on them if there is no hair.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Greg. Okay.
Is that, what stadium is that?
We're not sure. Well, it could have been Bradford.
I think it's Bradford.
Bradford?
How about some of the sports that you participated in, Muddy, and baseball? And
Well, the other half of the story was that the reason I was in Italy at a time when it was an awkward time in my so-called sports career, because that was the time when I had an opportunity to show up at the Polo Grounds to see, you know, just where I stood maybe on the New York Giants farm clubs and what have you. But I was denied that because it was the year before that when I played with the Bristol Twins. which is Class D baseball, very similar to the Jamestown team. And 3 of us were selected to report to the Polo Grounds the following spring. And we were told that before the season ended. But of course, these other fellows were all just fresh out of high school. They were mostly 18-year-olds. And I was my college graduate. I was probably 3 or 4 years older than these guys. And so naturally, I had already enlisted in the Naval Reserve and all that. And I got, when I went to when we left Pier 42 in 1944, in the spring of 44, and we were in England about to cross the English Channel, you know, the invasion of Normandy, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, and some of you may have participated in. The night before we left the English Channel to cross, the night before we left England to cross the Channel, I got back with a whole bunch of mail. Back mail caught up with me. Now that was, you know, that was back, we're talking about the invasion, which was on June 6th. And I got mail as far back as March, April, you know, among which was this letter from the Polo, which I'd forgotten all about. This letter from the New York Giants. I opened the letter up and I read it, and I felt, well, I should probably go to my skipper, you know, the captain of the ship, and tell him that I may have a conflict of interest tomorrow. I may not be able to make that. I wouldn't want to repeat exactly the way he said it. But, and I thought, well, how nice that was. But you know, I can compensate for that experience by the fact that at least I did get to meet my grandparents. I mean, there was something good about my going abroad. It wasn't all bad, I guess. The other 3 boys that were selected to report, I don't know if any of you go back that far. One is Bob Cain, C-A-I-N. And I remember once, right after the war was over and I was home, reading the newspaper and the sports page headlines, Cain beats Feller 2-1. So, you know, that must have been, he must have been quite successful in his major league. I don't know how long he was with the major leagues. I can't even tell you the team he played for. Johnny Promisa was the catcher that was selected to report to the Polo Grounds the following year also. I remember him vividly, seeing him in a Cincinnati Reds uniform. When my wife and I, we were married in 48, and then 49 we took a trip down to Bristol, Tennessee. And in doing so, we made it out of our way to go through Cincinnati. And there was Johnny Promisa in the Cincinnati Reds uniform. Big, tall, husky man, catcher for the Cincinnati Reds. His home was in West Virginia. And I was the 3rd one. So I don't know. I probably would never have gone any further in Class D baseball, but I never was given the privilege to find out, you know, just how far I might have gone in it. But
What did you play? What position did you play?
I played right field with the Bristol Twins.
How did you start us back a little bit further? Came out of, how did you end up in professional baseball?
Well, I had a football scholarship at King College in 1940, in the fall of 1940. And I played during the fall of 1940 and the fall of 41. Right after the close of our football season, if you'll recall, I think it was December 7th, 1944, or 1941, when they attacked Pearl Harbor, right? It was the beginning of the war. The moment that happened, our the board of trustees at King College discontinued football. Football was the biggest parasite, financial parasite on the campus. I don't think King College even had as many as 200 students at that time. Most of them were pre-ministerial students, Presbyterian. It was a Presbyterian college. And a lot of them were pre-ministerial students. A lot of them were from the graduates of the local area there in Bristol. And the rest of us were jocks. And the jocks were looked upon very favorably. The professors didn't love us. The students didn't like us, the community, you know, they took pride in the fact that we were athletes and that we represented King College very, very well. As I said, we had a college of around 200, and but before I go into that, to answer your question, Greg, football was discontinued at the beginning of my sophomore year. Well, that, you know, that cut into my plans quite deeply. I enlisted in the Naval Reserve, the B-7 program, for an officer's candidate school, you know. And what happened was the time that we enlisted was what? Probably, let's say, the end of the first semester, around January or so. I hitchhiked all the way from Bristol to Nashville, Tennessee, with another buddy of mine to sign up in the reserves. And at the end of the sophomore year, we all went back home. And, of course, there was no more scholarships. There was no more football program. You were on your own, you know. And so I was expected to be called, you know, during the summer or whatever, to report for duty. I get a letter from the president of the college stating that we need to select 2 men from the former football team to supervise some kind of an obstacle course program on the college campus. You see what was happening back then, practically all the guys, the men in the that were in college had enlisted and were waiting to be called. And in order for them to be deferred from being called into active service, they had obstacle courses. We had ladders and obstacles all over the campus that they had to run and participate in this program about 3 times a week in order to stay in some kind of physical condition so that when they were called into the service, they were capable to, you know, perform in the Army, Navy, Marines, or whatever. Well, now they needed 2 men to supervise that program. And the 2 men that they chose, this is one thing where I take my hat off to King College. As being a Presbyterian school, I'm a Catholic. They're in the south of the Mason-Dixon. I'm a damn Yankee from up home, you know. They select the two of us that they selected were myself and this guy from Ohio who was a Catholic. Both Catholics, both Yankees. That made no difference on who they were going to select for this program. So we were highly honored to go back to school and start my 3rd year. And I hadn't been called yet into the service. I started my 3rd year. Having taken a very heavily loaded program, I finished in 3 years and summer school. All right, now, when I finished my 3rd year, still on a scholarship basis, then I was all through. Then during the summer, I picked up a job at a funeral home. I was going to classes mornings, worked in the funeral home afternoons, and evenings I played professional baseball with the Bristol Twins. And that's how I got hooked up with the Bristol Twins. Now the people have asked me, how can you play professional baseball when you're away at college? Well, that's the answer. Yeah.
And you worked a job and played baseball at the same time.
Right. Well, fortunately, I think there were only 6 teams in the league, and they were all within a radius of about 40 or 50 miles from Bristol. So we never had to stay over. You know, it wasn't that far that you had to stay over.
Did the Twins have a working relationship with the Giants?
Yes. Yes.
How did that work in those days? I still don't understand. Today I understand player development contracts, but I don't understand how they worked back in those days. Did they send players? Was your contract with the Giants or was it with Bristol?
With Bristol.
With Bristol. Bristol hired you.
But the Giants were the farm club, the father club, you know.
So
they were in charge.
They had first crack. If Bristol, so if the Giants wanted you, they had to buy out your contract.
We had a guy that was a little older than I was, at Ossie McClure, that was picked up by the Jersey City Giants. Jersey City was an international league, right? If I recall correctly. He jumped up to the international league. The Bristol Twins have no control over that. I mean, you do what Daddy says, you know. No.
So question, Marion, when you played professional ball, can you remember of anyone that you played with if they went up into higher class? Any players?
Well, the 3 I just mentioned: Bobby Kane, was a pitcher, John Permisa, a catcher, and myself. There were three of us that were asked to report for the polo grounds the following spring. These guys were 4 years younger than I was, see?
What league was that?
The Appalachian League.
Appalachian.
Yeah, I think there was a misprint in the Post-Journal. It said Kingston. I have nothing to do with Kingston. I don't know who that is. I think what Jim Riggs meant to put there was the Appalachian League. Bristol was part of the Appalachian League down there.
Well, Kingston was in that Appalachian League, weren't they?
Were they? I don't know.
Yeah.
They weren't then. They weren't when I was there.
How about your high school baseball?
High school. Well, I enjoyed. I don't remember anything, outstanding about it. I played on the high school baseball team 4 years. I think I played shortstop much of the time, second base.
Muddy, did you play under both Kenny Anderson and
Yeah.
Cameron?
Yeah.
I figured you
What a difference between the two of them. Other than that, oh, God. Kenny Anderson was the kind of guy that during basketball practice, he'd have a scrimmaging, and he'd want to go down and have a smoke. He may have run out, so he'd go into the locker room, into one of the boys' trousers, pick up a cigarette, go to the boiler room, and you'd see him maybe an hour later. And we had a winning team despite of all that.
Not with Cameron, though.
Maven Cameron came around.
Oh,
He said,
night and day.
well, different
I was in
player.
a sectional track meet one time, I think it was at Hamburg. You may not remember Andy Skoma.
Oh, yes.
And we were coming back from the track meet, and we got into Dunkirk.
All right, this is a general question. I don't know if anybody has the answer to it during this research project, and I need to know if anybody knows anything about Harry Bisgeier, where he came from, what his background was, anything? Anybody have any knowledge on Harry Bisgeier other than he owned the club?
I knew Harry Bisgeier.
All right, hold on. Let's get you focused. Serious
If I got a
stuff.
mouthful, that'd be all right.
Well, we haven't started anything yet. This is kind of like a Vince McNamara thing.
Yeah.
All right, well, tell me about Harry Bisgeier.
Well, he was the president of the ball club, and they had their offices down here on 2nd Street, right where the Post-Journal is now. And if Harry could have proceeded to do what he wanted to do, he would have changed the stature of baseball. He wanted to present a yellow baseball for night games. And I'll never forget, I walked in down there one day, and here he sat with a pan that you make a pie in, and he had yellow stuff in that, and here he was rolling baseballs in there. And he had a bunch of them that had been already done, and Harry took them down to the stadium, used them in batting practice during the twilight time before the ball game started, and they worked out good. Now, whatever come of that, I don't know.
Yes, please.
But Harry, he was a Jewish fella, and at that time, a dollar was a dollar, and Harry was a good president of the ball club, I'll tell you that. He stood behind them. And he also stood behind the team, not the team, but the city.
What was his background? What did he do? What did he do for a living?
He came from Buffalo, didn't he, Lyle?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
I'm sure he came from Buffalo.
So he's a businessman in Buffalo, sort of. He's the guy that moved the team from Niagara Falls down here?
I think so. Don't quote me, but I think he did. He was connected with baseball before he came here.
After he sold, did he sell the team then to Yakov? Is that what happened?
Yeah.
And then he left. I mean, he had no reason to be
Yeah,
gone.
and then he just, what you might call, disintegrated.
He was here solely then for baseball.
That's right.
He didn't have a cleaning business or furniture business or
Not that No. They had their offices. You remember where they had their offices down there on 2nd Street upstairs?
I wasn't even born then.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
Wow.
Geez,
Do I
you know,
remember?
they get to be a defeated player.
Wow. Was it somewhere around Gandy's restaurant, wasn't it? Where the offices were?
Yeah, it was,
Andy's?
yeah, right there where the, Post Journal is now.
Yeah,
Upstairs on the second floor.
upstairs over at Gandy's restaurant.
That's right. That's right.
Wisteria Grill was on the corner.
Yeah, yeah.
He spoke about his business obligations in Buffalo, but I didn't pay too much attention to that because I was just beginning and I was interested in playing ball. I wasn't interested in his afterlife, see. But I knew he talked about some kind of a business he had in Buffalo. Yeah.
I was sure he came from Buffalo.
Well, Vince should know that. McNamara.
I figured who would know that? Timber.
Yeah, he might will.
Kinky? Yeah.
John Yocum could tell you his background.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, he was supposed
Give
to.
me-
You remember Vince Geyer, didn't you?
This guy,
Yeah.
Jamestown, sure. He was a
Give me the,
baseball enthusiast. He liked baseball, he followed it.
Oh, yeah.
This guy was the business manager at one time
hey Russ,
for Jamestown.
oh, we have all this brain power here.
Mhm.
Give me so you can recall, the ownership, kind of the chronology. Anybody know who originally brought Jamestown to Celeron? What was the name of the guy who set it up? 1939, we end up in Celeron. Does anybody recall who was that set that franchise?
Pirates?
It was the Pirates, but who? The individual. Do you remember?
Was O'Rourke manager in Selwyn? Or Al Park?
Who?
He was
O'Rourke?
the manager.
Yeah,
He was a field manager.
yes, O'Rourke. Yeah. Of course, I was busy riding in the ballpark on the,
Underneath the canvas.
running board on the side. That's how I got in the ballpark.
So then, anyways, where it was in 39, then Bisgeyer brings it back down in 1940 from Niagara Falls. Bisgeyer keeps it here and then sells it to Yocum. Yocum keeps it and then he sells it to who?
I think it's sold to Detroit.
Detroit?
I would think so. And that's somewhere around the time that Cedric Callis came here.
Well, Detroit would have owned it.
Cedric probably ran it for Detroit.
Good enough for a deal
Would that be about right?
Pretty close.
Yeah.
Then the Tigers would have owned it to what, 57? Is that when the Pirates took it over for that 1 year?
Yes. They were here for that, then they only had a short season. They stopped one in June.
June or July of 57.
So,
What was the team, by the way? Don Clendenin was there. Then it came back in 61, was that community ownership then?
more or less, that was Tigers were here. That's about the time Hillman Lions would come back to town to be part of the hotel. And Hillman and those people put it together. That's back in the time when they had Nick Ciccarella, I think, was the general manager.
Yep. When was it they sold public stock? Called it the Furniture City.
It was Jerry Lawson and those people. That was prior to that.
Lawson would have had it when it was in the dying years there.
Yes.
That's right, yeah.
Remember the baseball stock that they sold?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got some of
You
that.
still have a certificate of it.
Yes, I do. My dad believed that.
Do you have your certificate?
At home,
Dig it up.
I ain't got far to go. I only got 4 shells to look at.
Okay, that'd be fun to see.
And I also got some stocks that the Post Journal sold when they were in business down there.
Post Journal or Jamestown Sun?
Hmm?
Post Journal or Jamestown Sun?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you right now till I look to see. I couldn't tell you. I wouldn't want to commit until I did.
Okay, that just so I can, Hillman Lions would have kind of taken that over. It sounded like it was community ownership.
Yes, that's when Jules Newhouse, and those people were active. Jules was the president. Jim Sanders, Roger Anderson.
Oh, that guy's name.
When did you get
M.
involved?
Jennings, probably in,
UHT.
I remember that name, yeah, sure.
probably in the late 50s.
Played block.
As far as ownership and involvement down here?
That was in the late 50s and early 60s.
Had an
when
answering service, and see.
Doc Foley and Eric Guggen and I were trying to hold it together.
Now, there was no team between 57 and 61, right?
No.
And he plays
And that's when it come back under the leadership of a fellow from a telephone company, Lou Shepard. He was the president of the telephone company over here.
Really?
And he got interested along with Marty Haynes and Eric Guggen and a group of those people. That's when the team was, that's after Hillman and Nick Ciccarella and those people, we followed them. And I remember there was quite a debt left behind, somewhere around $40,000. And we took and put a group together we called Sustaining Membership, and each one donated $200, and for that they got some tickets, and the other balance of money was used to pay the debt. And we were able to pay the debt off completely, dollar for dollar, the local debt and the debt around the country, like Louisville and Rawlings and bus and hotels and all that throughout the league. It took us a couple of years to do that. And
Back then, $40,000 was
a lot of money.
an awful lot of money.
And for whatever reasons, attendance wasn't that high. Attendance was a struggle. And that went on several years, and then it went dormant then. And then they come back again with the Expos.
I got a question to ask. I hear a lot of times of, didn't have baseball in Jamestown for a period of time. When was that?
There was no entry in the New York Penn League. In other words, they, 57, for example, the Pirates folded their 10th, they gave up the franchise. And there was
Here?
Jamestown.
Yes.
So there was no baseball, New York Penn League entry, end of 57 through 60. So 61 it was the Tigers.
57 to 61, 5 years, 6 years,
4 years.
4 or 5 years. There was no baseball here at all,
No,
None.
no professional baseball.
no professional baseball.
Then there was
I
another,
wondered.
there was another pause when 74?
Yeah, 70, there was a couple of years, 74, maybe 75. That's when that'd be after the Red Sox left, I think. The Red Sox were here for several years, and then they went to Williamsport. And then that's when the Expos come back again. Jim Fanning and them brought it back, and that was here, I think, what, 17 years, something like that, with Montreal? That's when a businessman from South Dayton, Cliff Farnham, was, he wanted to know why there was no baseball, and he wanted to be part of trying to help it. And I remember him in the recreation office, and he sat there as I called Jim Fanning in Montreal. They had a conversation, and Jim said, well, maybe we might be looking for an operation in the NYP League. He said, let me get back to it. All of that was history. After that, they come back, put their team in. Jim was the one that brought baseball to Jamestown when the Braves were here. The Atlanta Braves were here a single year. He was with Atlanta then. That's when they had Harry Dorish as the manager. And that was the time like when Marty Haynes and that group was running the ball club. And then that same time period is when they had the Dodgers. The Dodgers are here 1 year.
They were?
Yeah. Fresco Thompson. Bill Berrier was the manager.
How do you ever let them in town?
Well, Fresco, through some of his relationships with basically Vince McNamara, they were looking for a Class A team, a Class D, or whatever they wanted to call it. So they were here 1 year.
Very, Muddy, tell me something. How many letters did you get in high school?
Everybody tells me I got 15.
I always under the impression you had 60.
No, I think that's the reason why I don't know. I couldn't, when I graduated from high school, everybody was telling me you missed one sport, so you got 15, because it's 4 sports, 4 years.
Right, right.
I missed football.
Oh, you missed football?
I played, JV football
Right.
the first year,
Right.
and then while I was playing that, I was varsity in all the other sports.
Now, who did you play for? Who was the coach then?
Kenny Anderson.
Okay.
Well, and then until Cameron came around.
Cam came on.
Yeah. All the difference between night and day, You could do anything. Kenny Anderson could care less. Maybe Cameron says, you call me Mr. Cameron. You no women, no drinks, no smoking, no going out, no nothing. You're turning your life over to me, mister. That's it. And I'll never forget. I was having a hard time trying to convince my dad to play football. He didn't want me to play. I finally forged the signature and went out to play without his knowledge. Isn't that terrible of a school teacher to tell you something like that?
Why didn't he want you to play?
Well, it was a rough game. He just came over from Italy. See, my father was the oldest of a large family, and he was the only one that left the family to come to the States because he finally realized when he was in his early 30s that he's not going to get anywhere in this world spading his father's soil. I mean, he got tired of it. He did it for, so he finally called it quits. He came over here with the idea that if he ever got married and had a child, he was going to go to college. He was not, and I was never going to make him. He was never going to make him do any kind of work. I couldn't even have a newspaper route. A lot of my buddies had newspaper routes and different things. No, sir. He says, you got lots of time the rest of your life to work, because he was a victim of just hard labor, slave labor. That's it. He did, and he kept telling me. I can remember, I was 3, 4 years old. College education in your head is better than $1,000 in your pocket. And that was those days $1,000 was a lot of bread. And it didn't make sense to me. I was just a kid, I didn't know what he's talking about. I went through high school, I went through all the schools, and he wanted to make sure that I always paid attention, did schoolwork. What he did not know was that there was no way in God's creation that he was going to send me to college, because he didn't have the do-re me. He didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, because he didn't have any skills when he came over here. He worked in the Malibu iron shoveling sand all his life. He'd get there at 4 o'clock in the morning and come home 3, 4 in the afternoon, and he had to walk all the way across the village of Faulkner back and forth all those years.
How did he figure that you were going to go to college then?
He wanted me to have a college education because he didn't want me to have the life that he had, see. So, but he was not knowledgeable about how you go about getting a college education.
Right.
He didn't know that it cost money. He didn't know there was such things as scholarships,
You get the idea of going.
academic scholarships, athletic scholarships. He didn't know anything about that. So consequently, when I told him I wanted to play football, he said, I don't know. He says, I've never seen a football game in this country. He says, all I know is rough. And he says, no son of mine is going to be getting through rough treatment, no way. So every day during the month of August, when you get started for football practice, he'd come home from the Malibu Iron on those hot dog days, and I'd be sitting on the porch waiting for him. Daddy, sign this paper so I can play football. No. This went on for several days. One day he must have had a bad day at the shop. He got a hold of me and he says, you know what you can do with that damn paper? He says, he grabbed me by the shoulder and sat me down. He says, all I know is this football is a rough game. And he said, if anyone's going to break your arm, he says, I want to be able to do it, not them. And he thought that scared me, see? He thought, no, he won't bug me anymore, Little did he know, I forged his signature that very day, and my mother and sister knew that I was going out for football, but he didn't know it.
Wait,
And
this,
so-
I'm going to send
all
this
right,
to Carl.
you want
I'm
to-
going to send this to Carl.
All right, okay. Very good.
I've got to run. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
okay,
Thank you.
okay,
The
thank
tank is
you.
still running.
Thank you.
Okay, Greg.
So what happened is, there was no talk of football for about 3 weeks. My mother and sister knew I was going out for football, and that I was out there. He thought he convinced me against it. Well, then 3 weeks go by, and it's we're playing the Faulkner JVs are playing the Warren JVs at Faulkner. And we lived on Central Avenue there on East James, just a block away from the high school. So Friday night, the night before the ball game, we usually have fish. In those days, it was a custom that we had to have fish, you know. So we eating our fish, and all at once my father at the dinner table says, you know, he says, the guys at the shop are talking about a football game tomorrow at Falconer. He says, I've been in this country 20-some years. I like to see what the hell is football. My mother's face and my sister's face turned red. And I had the fear of God because I could feel that strap coming my way. So, because in those days, you know, you never crossed the old man, no way, shape, or manner. So what happened was, I said, yeah, I says, Pa, I says, I think I heard something about it, you know. What the hell could I say? So I go out there, it was an afternoon game, I go out there and get all taped up and everything, you know, and this is my first game of my lifetime, and I could not even be bothered with what my dad had to say about it, you know. I was enjoying it. I did the punting, the passing, the running, we warmed up and everything, and Coach gets us into a big huddle before the game, you know, like this, with Tyler hands up.
Right.
And I just happened to look up at the bleachers, and there was my dad.
Oh,
And he was going like this.
You knew what you got coming home.
You know damn well what you're going to get. You son of a
Fun when you
gun.
can.
Well, you know, with all the butterflies you have in your stomach, you really don't need that, you know.
That's right.
Well, anyway, ball game starts off, and it was nip and tuck all the way. Scoreless tie at halftime, 3 quarters, nobody scored. And it was getting down toward the end of the 4th quarter, and Warren, being a bigger team, heavier team, they were beginning to wear us down, and they were pushing down into about our 20-yard line. When all at once our line decided not to give them an inch, and they did. In those days, you very seldom threw the ball. We always would run the ball, you know. First 3 downs, they couldn't make more than a couple yards. 4th down, they figured they had to throw a pass. Warren Check, who later played for Duquesne University, left-hander, faded back to throw the pass. Our line rushed the hell out of him. I was a defensive halfback. I did not make any spectacular play. The ball just landed in my arms. And I could run like a deer. So I ran 80 yards down for a touchdown.
Oh, my God.
And I got down there, and Bill Broadhead, remember Bill Broadhead?
Yeah.
This was one of his later days of umpiring. He said, yeah, I'm down on one knee, you know, my teammates are, you know, congratulating me, and the coach, Broadhead comes up and says, son, he says, I know you're tired and I'm tired. He says, who's that guy that beat us both down? And there's my dad puffing on the cigar, and that's where I got the the reputation, that's my son, okay? Oh, that's too much. No thanks.
You know, Marion, he had a good idea. Don't mix football with baseball. Did he have that idea?
No. He didn't know anything about sports. He didn't know the first thing about football or baseball.
But he did know it was rough.
He knew football was rough, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he go to the rest of the games?
Did he? You couldn't keep him away. You couldn't keep him away from the games. He was my biggest obstacle and turned out to be my greatest asset.
Right.
He was right there all the time. To this very day, some of the old timers, they see me in a supermarket and they say, "That's my boy." They're still, 55 years ago, they're still, you know.
I remember
Well-
him well. I do too. I can remember going to the store and buying penny candy.
Yeah. And he was so proud of me. And of course, later on, when he found out that maybe I might be able to get a scholarship to play football or something, you know. Well, then he was all for it.
And when you get a chance, will you put that in the doggy bag?
When you played pro ball, you said the league was there was no overnights. Did you stay with families or?
No, we drove home.
But where'd you stay then when you come back home?
Well, he was in college.
Well, I was staying at a boarding
Stay
home.
right in the boarding
I
home?
was staying at a boarding home, so I just boarded there, you know. And I worked mornings. I went to classes, and afternoons I worked at the funeral home, and then nights we'd go out and play ball. And it was a regular routine. I mean, there's no problem.
When you were at King College, did you ever hear of the record of Elton Sharp from Jamestown?
Did I hear the wreck? That's another story.
He was supposed to be one of the greatest
he's not supposed to.
Backfield man that there ever was.
You mentioned the name Elton Sharp. And
Yeah, I worked for him.
back in those days when he was active there, and people would bow down on both knees and praise him to high heaven. He was not only a star, he was some kind of an institution within himself. He was tremendous. It was through Elton Sharp's recommendation that I had a tryout to go down to King College, through his nephew Cliff. Did you know Cliff?
Yeah, no more. I worked for the Sharks.
Okay, then let me tell you. Then I'll tell you how I worked into this. Elton Sharp was manager of the O'Neill Chartrand baseball team, the Muni League, in the baseball Muni League. He took a very personal interest in me, and I was probably 13, 14 at the time. I never saw Cliff for 3 or 4 more years. I had finished high school, and I PG'd. And after I PG'd, then I got careless. I wasn't in training anymore. I started smoking, going out, drinking, fooling around like teenagers, what they do. And they're not in shape. You're not an athlete anymore. All at once, he came across me in Faulkner, just happened to run into me in early September after my postgraduate year. And he says, "Money," he says, "aren't you going to college?" I says, "No, I guess not." He says, "You mean you're not going to go to college on a scholarship or anything?" I says, "No." He says, "Well," I said, "I went out to Niagara last year, during my senior year, latter part of my senior year, Wayne Frazier and I. Remember Wayne? The two of us went to Niagara, try out through what's his name? Phil Albano. Remember Phil Albano? Played for Niagara. He was a big star, and it was made a little All-American, I believe. Well, Phil Albano gave me us a recommendation, a reference, just a reference, to go there and try out at Niagara. We saw the guy, I guess the guy's name was Belito, was a freshman coach at the time. So we're knocking on this door, and we thought it was the freshman coach. It turned out to be the head coach's door. Joe Bach was head coach at Niagara University. He was one of the 7 mules at Notre Dame. We knock on this door, Wayne and I, we look at this guy. He says, "What do you want?" He says, give him a slip. He says, "Go see Belito," he says, "and tell him not to give you a uniform." He says, "We're too small. We have no business at Niagara, I only weigh, even today, I don't weigh 170. And Wayne was taller than I was, but, So we go to Belito, the freshman coach, and he says he's instructed not to give us football uniforms. He says he gives you a pair of trunks. You can pass and kick on the sidelines while we're scrimmaging, having practice. I'll be watching you and see what so forth and so on. We were there for a week. And the guy that was going great guns for them was Ostricker from Salamanca, whose butt we kicked at Faulkner. We beat them 6-0. I'll never forget that game. After I played, when I didn't carry the ball, I was on defense, backing up the line. And I'll never forget, after that game was over yesterday, I take a shower. I was the last one to take a shower because I was really all beaten up. You tackle that guy, and he had like 220 pounds, just bone and muscle. I mean, he was terrific. Got down there, the drinking fountain at the corner of Work and Main at Faulkner, and my teammate says, "Here comes that stupid Rizzo that didn't know how to get out of Ostricker's way." I was really a battered mess, Now here's this Ostricker going great guns at Niagara, and I'm in a pair of shorts. I would love to be able for that, but no way. That was it. So it's as far as it went. We went back home. They told us at the end of the week, "We can take care of your room and board, but your parents have to pay the tuition." Well, our parents didn't have it. So I was telling this to Cliff Sharp. So Cliff says, "I'll tell you," he says, "now I got an uncle in some small college down south," he says, "that was very, very famous in football. Made a big name for himself, tremendous. And he said, I'll see if I can't get him to give you a reference, a recommendation." Apparently he got a hold of his uncle, and he said, well, Elton says, "I've heard of this guy Rizzo." He says, "but I've never seen him play. But Cliff says, take my word for it. He's good. He plays with all his heart, this and so forth." He talked Elton to pick up the phone this was like the first week of September. Pick up the phone and call Bristol, King College, and because it was Elton Sharp, he says, send him down. He says, we'll give him a 2-week tryout. This was not during the days when they had scouts and movies and all that paraphernalia, you know. 2-week tryout, do or die. So I told my dad about this. My God, he jumped up to the ceiling. So excited about it, you know. He went to, I think he had $25 in his pocket or in the bank, and he went to Carnahan's. I remember bought a trunk and clothes and everything, and I was on my way to Tennessee. I get down there after going through those mountains through West Virginia. I never been any further away from home than Cleveland. Remember, we saw the Yankees play the Cleveland once.
How did you get there?
With a chaperone. You mean to Bristol? By bus. By bus. It took us 3 nights and 2 days. And by the time I got into the Bristol and took a taxi cab up to the campus, it was close to 3 o'clock. The coach knew I was coming. He says, well, he said, you know, we start practice at 3:30. I'll see that the manager gets you a uniform. I would have liked to have told him what to do with that uniform because I was in no condition to play football. I was out of shape to start with,
Number one.
and then you know 3 nights and 2 days without sleeping, you know, on those benches, but I went out there, and to this very day I don't know how the dear Lord ever, you know, how I ever survived, because I took a real physical beating. I was just battered all over. I remember I never could tackle unless I tackled head on. And those big, you know, they didn't have a freshman team at King. It was one team. You go out for the team, and you have to tackle these big 240-pound, 220-pound Cornhuskers from Tennessee. And I'll never forget once, this is no exaggeration, my nostrils from cheek to cheek, just battered, because we didn't have nose guards in those days. You know? And those knees coming up, you know, and because I didn't know any other way. But the thing I didn't forget was Larry Ledestro. Remember Larry Ledestro? All right. Larry Ledestro was a neighbor of mine, and he took a great interest in me in American Legion baseball. I haven't talked about that aspect of baseball. That's probably the most colorful experience I had, was American Legion baseball, more so than high school or even the pros, so to speak. But anyway, not to get off the track, Larry Ledestro heard, I don't know how he heard it, that I was offered a 2-week tryout to go to Tennessee to college. He lived right around the corner from me. My parents had a little grocery store there, neighborhood grocery store. He came into the grocery store and he says, what's this? He said, if you know Larry Ledestro at all, a big, tall, husky, you know, and he speaks with authority, you know. He comes up to me and he says, I understand you're going to Tennessee for a football tryout. I said, yeah. I wasn't too excited about it, but I said, yeah, you know. He says, well, get in there and give him hell. I says, Larry, I says, you know, I'm not in very good shape. I let myself go during the summer, and you know, it's pretty rough. He came up to me and put his finger in my eye, even more so than my father. He says, don't you dare come back to Faulkner and say you didn't make it. By God, I says, I don't want to hear that. And I said, well, I'll do my best. You know, what else can I do? I mean, I was just a kid, you know, and I haven't been away from home or anything. And I didn't know what I was really in for. But I'll tell you, there were times after about the 2nd or 3rd days when you really feel it. First couple of days, you know, it's when you start getting lame and sore. Every muscle in your body is just, you know. But somehow or other, I kept saying, there's no way I can quit because Larry Ledestro will not allow it. No way. I'll have to account to that guy for this. And I not only made the team, in fact, I not only made the team, but as I say, 2 years later when they discontinued football, I was selected as one of the 2 out of over 50 on a football squad to go back and resume on the same scholarship basis. You know, I mean, so I just feel that college, I'm very heavily indebted to them, very much so.
How about American Legion?
American Legion was real exciting. You know, there weren't any midget football or Babe Ruth or Little Leagues in those days. It was just American Legion. And we played, a whole bunch of us guys. Len Quaint, see this Faulkner now? It's you know, Len Quaint, Ollie Strickland, Warren Me, Warren Studd, Frank Walker, Sammy Piazza.
Did Ralph Me play with you?
Well, no, he was older. Warren was in our age group. Well, at 16, I have to tell you my date of birth is 21. That's 37, okay? In the year of 37, we not only beat Chautauqua County, Jamestown and all them, we knocked off Buffalo at Gowanda, something that's unheard of.
1940.
37. 37. It would have to be
37.
36 or 7. Okay. We beat Buffalo 6-2, and this was single elimination, you know. We knocked off Rochester at the Oriole Field 2-1. And I'll tell you how they made that one. It was an error of mine on shortstop. Oliver Strickland was a pitcher, and he always reminds me of
You moved to shortstop though.
I played shortstop when I was with the Legion in high school.
Right.
But with the pros, I played right field because they loved my arm. I could throw the ball from right field to third base on one hop and get the guy trying to go 3 bases.
Right.
And my batting average sort of justified it. I think I batted 284 that year. And so where was I? Little League or American Legion. We beat Rochester 2-1 in Buffalo. Then we played Johnson City, a suburb of Binghamton, because I went right by there this weekend. And we played them at Rochester Red Wing Stadium, and they beat us. They couldn't hold a candle to those other teams. But you know, it's one day you lose a game, and that you're all through. You know.
Right.
There's something very fascinating about that Rochester game at Oriole Field. Ollie Strickland was slated to pitch, but he didn't know that. You don't know who's going to pitch until you get there. His father was an avid sports fan and followed Ollie wherever he went. But on that particular Saturday, he was asked to work. He had to work in a shop, and so Ollie lived out in Gary. He had no way to get to Jamestown to hitchhike. You know who picked him up? These people from Rochester, whose son was a pitcher for the Rochester team.
Is that right?
And Ollie was the pitcher. He picked up Ollie, and they didn't know that at the time.
Oh, my.
They didn't know that they were opposing
Did you
pitchers.
get a ride home?
That's interesting.
Isn't that ironical? I mean, how that happens. And Ollie takes such great pleasure in telling that story. Even more so than when that ball went through me, and I allowed him to have that one run.
Right.
Palmer beating him.
Yeah.
Hughes' son pitched American Legion ball too, you know.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he did.
He had games with a guy from Buffalo, Bill Joyce, was a pitcher. Does that ring a bell at all? Joyce.
Bill Joyce.
Yeah,
Manufacturing, yeah.
that was 2 or 3 years before you then.
Oh yeah. Palmer was a little older than
Yeah.
that.
You're at Lincoln Junior High School.
Mayor, speaking of American Legion,
close to that.
if you can remember,
Close to that when you played.
one year Faulkner went to Buffalo
No, I came
to
after
play
that.
off. I think it was Orchard Park. At that time, Pavlo was chief police.
Yeah.
He took some boys.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I want to ask you is, if you can remember this, one of the Faulkner boys hit a home run to go score ahead, and he missed second base.
Oh.
They appealed, and it was the third out, no score. Do you remember who was it that missed second base? I've got it. I wrote it down. I just
No,
can't
I don't.
remember.
I don't remember.
Were you the umpire that called
I
it
was
off?
You were
there.
the umpire that called it. That
I
granted.
wasn't the umpire,
Oh.
but let me say, he done his job, and he done a good job, because the offender
right.
was the boy who missed second base.
Yeah.
He made a mistake. Now, to not change the subject, why I mentioned Pavlo was, here's a guy standing up, and he asked somebody, who's playing here? And they said, Buffalo Legion is playing Faulkner Legion. Pavlo is right here, see, so he spoke up and says, Faulkner? He said, yeah, I was in that little dinky town. The chief of police put me in jail for just having a drink. Pavlo looked over like this, see? And he was talking about Pavlo, see? And he was the drunk that probably,
Yeah.
well...
Papa was a big guy too.
Yes, he was.
He
I
was
kept my
tall.
mouth shut. I didn't explore anymore. Well, anyhow, this boy then worked at the foundry, He got it when he grew up. Well, anyhow, I thought maybe you was aware of what happened.
No.
And Faulkner lost on account of this boy missing second
Yeah,
base.
the, this is the only time, as far as we know, I don't know, they didn't keep records that well years ago, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't ever recall, or no one else ever recalls Faulkner beating Buffalo, and then going on to beat Rochester and so forth. Another thing about the Rochester thing was this Kenny Anderson, you know, went to Irondequoit, which is a suburb of Rochester.
Oh, yeah.
And he knew we were coming up there. And so he took Glenn Quaint and me, and we stayed over with him.
Really?
Yeah, and he acquainted us with some of the Red Wing personnel.
Right.
You know, was trying to fix it up so we get a try. We were only 16 years old, you
Sure.
know. But I do remember Kenny Anderson inviting us to stay over with Glenn Quaint and I went out.
What year was that?
That was the same year, 37.
37?
See, we started when we were 12 years old. We went to 16.
Right.
16 is the limit.
16's a cutoff.
And I was born in 21, so it had to be 37.
You remember a pitcher in Jamestown on the Legion team by the name of Bones to Bones?
Oh, yes. I played with him.
Is that
Bones?
In the Beauty League.
Bones to
Louis.
Bones?
Yeah.
Louis.
They call it Bones, yeah,
He
Louis.
Yeah.
passed away not long ago.
He did.
Yeah. No, he lived to be a ripe old age.
With him at the
Yeah.
hospital.
He played with the Falcons in 40. Malone did, up in Allen Park.
I remember playing with him on Maury Mistretta's team that was called the Jamestown Spiders.
What kind of salaries you play pro ball for? You remember?
Well, you remember when John Pollock was here a couple weeks ago? I asked him what his salary was with the Falcons, and it was the same time in 43, see. He says, I got $70. I says, I did better than you, I got 90. $90 a month, $90 a month.
John
And-
got $70 a month?
Yeah, and where I was at in Bristol, I got 90.
What'd you have to pay out of that 90? Did you pay all your own expenses? or-
65.
Oh, yeah, oh, yes.
No meal money?
No,
neither?
I
no.
thought you were fed
No,
for it, man.
maybe they got meal money. We didn't get meal money.
You know, in that documentary, it showed the Homestead Grays a lot.
Yeah,
See, they used to come into Sullivan and play the Jamestown semi-pros. That's when Jamestown had Swat Erickson and Hugh Beatty. Back in 1927, the Homestead Grays came in. I saw them 3 or 4 times. The scores were always 1-0 or 2-1.
Yeah.
And those Homestead Grays had ball players that could have been in the majors, you know.
oh, I'm sure they could.
They came out of
Yeah,
Pittsburgh.
That's right, they were
Boy, they were,
a good outfit.
Lawrence, tell me one of your best experiences you ever had with about Ted Williams.
Oh, yeah.
Real quickly, and then.
well, in my book, Ted Williams, of course, I was a Red Sox fan. I'm a little bit prejudiced. I
Yeah.
thought he was the best hitter in baseball, but he won the batting titles in 41 and 42. Then he went into the Marine Air Force. He was gone 43, 44, and 45. The 3 best years he was gone. I was in Municipal Stadium in Cleveland this Sunday. He played his first game on his return from the service. He was batting against Bob Feller. We were in the right field stands. His first inning. He hit that ball, a long fly ball. It kept carrying, bounced up in the stands. Home run. He rounded the bases. Those Cleveland Indian ball players, they were all out of the dugout standing. They were all giving him the...
What a tribute.
Yeah, what a tribute.
That's really something. That's really something.
Great tribute.
You
He's been
know,
gone for 3 years, you know.
you know, I saw the one and only time I was away from home all the way until I graduated from high school. As I told you, was when I went to Cleveland to watch the New York Yankees play in one game, and we had Russell Orr. Remember Russell
Yes,
Orr?
yes.
He was our chaperone. We had 5 or 6 guys there, and he was our chaperone. And our parents allowed us to go, which was really a big concession, you know. And I'll never forget Lou Gehrig running down to first base and grabbing his leg.
Oh, yeah?
That's
that
right.
right?
It was in that ball game.
Is that right?
Unless he had had previous problems that I wasn't aware of. But we did notice in that ball game, he grabbed his leg. This was in 37, I think. They played the New York Yankees at Cleveland.
I can remember 1954, we were out there with a group, Merle Smith used to be, and we were part of a record that way. It was 86,000 people in Municipal Stadium, doubleheader with the Yankees. And I remember there was a guy stood down in front, razzing the left fielder for the New York Yankees. Unmercifully, Irv Noren.
Oh, our Jamestown product. Is that right?
Yeah.
Irv Norman is,
You know, this Bainbridge Ball Club that Williams went to was a pretty good ball club.
You know,
They had Wakefield on that club, and they had some good ball players on it. I was at Mobile in 1946. We played Bainbridge, Maryland, up there, an exhibition game. We beat them. But Williams was there and played there, and he had left about 2 or 3 weeks before that to go to combat.
oh, yeah.
no, no,
He had another stint later, too.
Hmm?
In the Grand War.
He had another stint later. He was 3 years, then he lost some more years.
Right.
You know, he came back, he won the batting titles in 47 and 48. And he won the batting titles in 57 and 58. Imagine that? 10 years apart.
Isn't that
2 in a row.
something?
He won
Isn't it?
10
Yeah.
years apart.
They told me, now, I don't know, I would imagine it's true. I never could see it, or never saw it, but they told me that when Williams hit, and a pitcher would throw, he said when the pitcher threw the ball, 5 feet after he threw the ball, Williams could tell whether the pitch was going to be over the plate or not.
Yeah, we'd be surprised.
He had the rest of the time to get ready.
I've always read it.
Wow.
If you let a pitch go
Hey,
by, the
Joe,
umpire
Joe,
automatically
would
raises
you hand me
the
that glass of water? Joe,
Folks, let's say thanks to Muddy for our presentation today. Muddy, thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you very much.
Our next scheduled meeting is the 26th, and I'm in the process of trying to get Art Asquith to get rescheduled to be here. Art played some pro ball here in the NYP League, and
That's of this month, October.
yes, 26th of October. He went on to be athletic director and coach at Casadega Valley. And he was scheduled, but he had an illness that day and couldn't be here, so.
Yeah.
Art's an interesting guy,
Yes.
I tell you.
Larry, what's your address in Falk? Well, we're scheduled with the Holiday Inn to go through the second and fourth Wednesdays, at least through this year, and we'll try to keep it going through the winter also.
Great.
Okay, thank you all for coming.
Thank you,
I
Russ.
watch football, I like football, but it's a shame that baseball got to a high peak in attendance.